We received a message from a woman named Nicole, and once our team finished reading it, no one in the room said a word for a long time. Nicole spent 10 years building what she believed was a perfect marriage, a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, a home filled with Sunday morning pancakes and laughter. She trusted her husband with everything, her heart, her savings, her child's future. But what Nicole didn't know was that the woman sitting across from her at the office every single day, the sweet, friendly coworker who bought her coffee every morning and called her sis, was sleeping with her husband. And it wasn't just an affair. Together they had been quietly draining Nicole's bank accounts, fabricating lies to take away custody of her daughter, and sabotaging her career from the inside, all part of a revenge plot that had been brewing for years, rooted in a secret from Nicole's past that she didn't even remember. Nicole discovered everything by accident one Wednesday afternoon in the company restroom, when she heard her husband's voice coming through her coworker's phone, whispering words that were never meant for her to hear. In that moment, her whole world shattered. But here's what her husband and that coworker didn't expect. Nicole didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't confront anyone. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She went quiet. And over the next 4 weeks, Nicole built a plan so precise, so devastating, that by the time her enemies realized what was happening, it was already too late. What Nicole did at her own 10th wedding anniversary party in front of her husband's mother, their closest friends, and the very woman who tried to destroy her is something none of them will ever forget. Now here is Nicole's story in her own words. My name is Nicole Bennett. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 12 years I've worked as a senior accountant at a mid-size real estate firm just outside Philadelphia. I'm the kind of woman who balances spreadsheets down to the last decimal packs, her daughter's lunch the night before, and never once forgot a wedding anniversary. I built my life on trust, on routine, on the quiet belief that if you love someone honestly enough, they will love you back the same way. For 10 years I believed that with everything I had. And for 10 years I was wrong. It started the way every good lie does, with something beautiful. A Sunday morning in late September, the kind where the sunlight comes through the kitchen window like honey and the whole house smells like butter and maple syrup. My husband Greg was standing at the stove making pancakes for our daughter Lily, who had just turned 8. She was sitting at the counter in her pajamas, kicking her feet against the stool and telling him a story about a caterpillar she found at school. He was laughing, flipping pancakes with one hand, and I stood at the bottom of the staircase watching them, thinking the same thing I had thought 100 times before. I am the luckiest woman alive. 10 years of marriage, and the man still made breakfast for his family every Sunday like it was sacred. That was the kind of husband Greg was. Or at least that was the kind of husband I believed he was. That morning, he set a plate in front of me, and I noticed the granola he had sprinkled on top. Almond granola. I pushed the plate back gently. Honey almonds. He blinked, then laughed it off. Sorry, I keep forgetting. But here is the thing Greg never used to forget. For 9 years, he could rattle off my allergy faster than his own phone number. Now, twice in 1 month, he had forgotten. I told myself it meant nothing. People get distracted. People have a lot on their minds. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, stood up without a word, and walked out to the backyard to take the call. Through the glass door, I could see him pacing near the fence, his back to the house. I could not hear what he was saying, but I could see the way his body moved, relaxed, easy, his head tilted slightly the way it does when he is being tender. That is not how a man talks to a client on a Sunday morning. I noticed. And then, like I had done so many times before, I told myself I was overthinking it. I poured more coffee and changed the subject in my own head. That was my specialty back then, ignoring what I did not want to see. At work, the following Monday, everything looked normal on the surface. But there was one person who always made the office feel a little brighter, and that was Jocelyn Pratt. She had joined the marketing department about 8 months earlier, and from her very first week, she had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. She remembered birthdays. She asked about your kids by name. She brought coffee for the whole floor without anyone asking. She was 28, sharp, energetic, and whenever she saw me in the hallway, she would smile wide and say, Hey, sis, like we had known each other for years. I liked her. I genuinely liked her. She reminded me of a younger version of someone I might have been if I had been a little more outgoing. During our lunch breaks, she would sit across from me and ask about my life, how Lily was doing in school, what Greg did for work, whether I traveled much for the company. It felt warm. It felt like she cared. I had no reason to think otherwise. That Monday, Jocelyn walked into the break room carrying a box of pastries from a bakery downtown. She came straight to me, held the box open, and offered me a cookie. Almond butter crinkle, try it. I shook my head. Can't, almond allergy. Her eyes went wide and she pulled the box back immediately. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. She looked embarrassed, flustered even. At the time, I thought it was a simple mistake, the kind anyone could make. But looking back now, I know the truth. She knew about my allergy. Greg had told her. She offered me that cookie on purpose, not to hurt me, but to watch me, to test how I reacted, to see how much I paid attention. It was never about pastries. It was about control. That same week, things at work started shifting in ways I could not explain. My direct supervisor, a man I had worked under for 6 years with never a single issue, began pulling me into his office to review reports I had already submitted. He questioned numbers that had passed through 3 rounds of approval. He asked me to re-explain calculations I could do in my sleep. I checked and rechecked everything. My work was flawless. So why was I suddenly being treated like a junior hire? Then, during a department-wide meeting, the VP of Operations made an unexpected comment about strengthening internal accounting oversight. As he said it, he looked directly at me. Not at the department. At me. My stomach tightened, but I kept my composure. After the meeting, as I walked back to my desk, Jocelyn appeared beside me. She touched my arm lightly and smiled. Don't stress about it. I'm sure it's just routine. Her voice was so gentle, so reassuring, and I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. I had no way of knowing that the reason my reports were being questioned, the reason the VP was suddenly scrutinizing my department, was because the woman comforting me in that hallway was the very person who had set the fire. I spent the rest of that week convincing myself everything was fine. My marriage was solid. My career was secure. My life was exactly where it was supposed to be. I believed all of that with the same certainty I believed the sun would rise. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I walked into the 3rd-floor restroom, the one nobody uses during lunch. Through the thin partition, I heard a woman's voice, low and sweet, talking on the phone. And then, a man's voice answered from the other end, deep, warm, unmistakable, "I miss you, baby." I didn't need to see his face. I've heard that voice every night for 10 years. It was my husband. I stood in that stall with my hand pressed flat against the wall to keep myself from falling. Through the thin partition, I could hear Jocelyn's voice, soft, playful, the kind of tone a woman uses when she feels completely safe with someone. She was talking through her earbuds, but in that empty restroom, her words carried like they were meant for me to hear. "I'll be done by 6, she murmured. "Don't start dinner without me." And then his voice came through, faint but clear enough from the phone speaker to cut me open. "Hurry home, baby. Hurry home." As if they already had one. My knees buckled and I grabbed the door handle to steady myself. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to kick that partition open, to rip those earbuds from her ears and shout the truth into her face. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something deeper, something colder held me still. Because in that moment, a single thought cut through the noise like a blade. They do not know I heard this. That is the only card I have. If I play it now, I lose everything. So I stood there. And I listened to the woman I had called a friend say goodbye to my husband like it was the most natural thing in the world. I heard the stall door open. I heard her heels click across the tile. I heard the restroom door swing shut. And then there was silence, and I was alone, and the person staring back at me from the mirror above the sink looked like someone I did not recognize. I turned on the cold water, splashed my face, dried my hands, and walked back to my desk. I opened my spreadsheet. I typed a number into a cell. And no one in that office had any idea that the woman sitting in chair 4B had just had her entire life ripped apart. I made sure of that. That night, Greg came home at his usual time. He kissed my forehead at the door, asked about my day, and played with Lily in the living room while I made dinner. I watched him, really watched him for the first time with open eyes. The way he laughed a little too easily. The way he checked his phone under the table and tilted the screen away from me. The way he said "love you" before bed like a man reciting a line he had rehearsed. I said it back. I smiled. And then I waited. At 11:40, his breathing changed. He was asleep. I slipped out of bed, walked to the living room, and opened the family laptop, the one we had shared for years, the one that sat on the coffee table where Lily did her homework. Greg had never been careful with technology. His email was still logged in on the browser the session saved from whenever he had last used it. I clicked the inbox, and my hands went cold. The first thing I found was a chain of emails with a divorce attorney, 16 messages going back 4 months. 4 months. While I was packing his lunches and planning our anniversary, my husband was building a legal case against me. I opened the draft divorce petition attached to one of the emails. The grounds he listed nearly stopped my heart. Petitioner states that respondent consistently prioritizes professional obligations over parental duties, frequently travels for work, leaving the minor child in the care of others, and fails to maintain a stable and nurturing home environment. Every word was a lie. Carefully constructed, deliberately worded, designed to paint me as a mother who had abandoned her child. I kept scrolling. There were photographs taken without my knowledge of me leaving the house early in the morning with my work bag, getting into my car for a business trip, coming home after dark. Ordinary moments of a working mother reframed as evidence of neglect. And then I found the journal, a document Greg had been writing for months, logging dates and times with notes like, Nicole missed Lily's soccer game work meeting, and Nicole arrived home at 8:47 p.m., Lily already in bed. Some of the entries were real. Most were exaggerated. A few were completely invented. He was building a paper trail to take my daughter from me. I moved to the financial records next. Joint checking, joint savings, Lily's college fund. I pulled up the statements and followed the numbers the way I have followed numbers my entire career. What I found was $47,000 missing from our accounts. Transfers to an account I had never seen before, made in small amounts over the past several months, designed to avoid triggering alerts. $14,000 of that came directly from Lily's college fund, the fund I had started the year she was born. He stole from his own daughter. But the discovery that broke something inside me was buried deeper in his inbox. An email thread between Greg and Jocelyn dated a year and a half ago, long before she ever set foot in my office. They had known each other before she was hired. She did not come to my company by coincidence. She came on purpose. I closed the laptop, placed it back exactly where it had been, and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, I went to work carrying everything I had learned like a stone in my chest. Before I had even reached my desk, my supervisor told me the VP of operations wanted to see me. Immediately, I walked into that conference room knowing something was wrong, and I was right. The VP sat across from me with printed copies of my quarterly financial reports, except the numbers on those pages were not my numbers. Someone had altered the figures after I submitted them. The decimal points were shifted, the totals were wrong, and the discrepancies made it look like I had either made catastrophic errors or committed fraud. The VP told me the board was considering a formal internal audit of the accounting department. He said it with the tone of a man delivering a warning. I sat there looking at falsified versions of my own work, and I understood exactly what was happening. If that audit proceeded using this corrupted data, the blame would land on me. 12 years of flawless service would mean nothing. I left the room with my back straight and my face calm. And there at the far end of the hallway stood Jocelyn. She was leaning against the wall, holding a coffee cup, smiling at me the way she always did. Meeting done, everything okay, I smiled back. I nodded. And I kept walking. I stood in that hallway watching Jocelyn walk away, and the full picture hit me. I was losing my husband, about to lose my daughter, about to lose my career, And the person orchestrating all of it sat across from me every single day, drank coffee I paid for, and called me sis. But there was one thing she didn't account for. I've managed every number, every decimal, every audit trail in this company for 12 years. And when an accountant decides to trace the money, nothing stays hidden for long. That night, after Lily's bedtime story, and after Greg had fallen asleep watching television on the couch, I carried my personal laptop to the kitchen table, spread out the bank statements I had printed at a FedEx store during my lunch break, and I did what I have done every single day for 12 years. I followed the numbers, except this time the numbers told the story of my own destruction. I worked from 11 at night until 3 in the morning, cross-referencing every transaction from our joint checking account, our joint savings, and Lily's college fund against the records I had pulled from Greg's email. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. The $47,000 I had discovered earlier was not scattered randomly. It had been moved in careful increments. $2,000 here, $3,500 there, always just below the threshold that would trigger a bank notification. Greg had been doing this for months, quietly bleeding our accounts dry, while sitting across from me at dinner asking how my day went. $14,000 of it came from Lily's college fund. The account I had opened the week she was born. The one I had contributed to every single month without missing once. But the detail that made my stomach turn was a lease agreement I found buried in Greg's deleted emails folder. A 12-month lease on a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, signed by both Greg and Jocelyn, with a security deposit paid directly from our joint savings. They had already picked out their next life together, and they were furnishing it with money that belonged to me and my daughter. I photographed every document, every bank statement, every email, every transaction record. I saved copies to a USB drive I kept in my purse and uploaded duplicates to a private cloud account I created that night using an email address Greg would never find. Then I spent the remaining hours before dawn doing something I never imagined I would need to do. I researched Pennsylvania divorce law. I read court rulings, legal summaries, statute explanations, and what I learned changed the shape of everything. In Pennsylvania, if a spouse can prove the other party concealed or transferred marital assets before filing for divorce, the court does not look kindly on it. Penalties range from an unequal division of remaining assets to full restitution orders. And Greg's fabricated journal, the one designed to prove I was a neglectful mother, would not serve as evidence of my failure. It would serve as evidence of his deception, especially when placed beside the reality that he was the one draining his daughter's college fund to rent an apartment for his mistress. He thought he was building a weapon against me. He had actually built a weapon against himself. The second front was the office. I knew Jocelyn had tampered with my financial reports, but knowledge without proof is just suspicion, and suspicion without documentation is just drama. If I walked into the VP's office and said my coworker changed my numbers, I would sound desperate. I needed the kind of evidence that speaks for itself. As senior accountant, I hold compliance-level access to our financial management system, specifically the audit trail module. Every edit made in that system is automatically logged, which user account made the change, what was changed, the exact timestamp, and the IP address of the machine used. This is not a backdoor. This is not unauthorized access. This is literally part of my job description, ensuring the integrity of financial data. So, during a quiet afternoon when most of the office was in a training seminar, I ran an audit trail report on every quarterly file that had been flagged by the VP. What came back confirmed everything. 14 separate edits had been made to my reports, all from a marketing department login assigned to Jocelyn. Marketing accounts are configured with read-only access to financial data. They can view reports for campaign planning purposes, but they cannot modify them. Jocelyn had somehow exceeded her clearance level and made right-level changes every single one after 6 in the evening when the office was empty. Every single one targeting reports that carried my name. 14 edits, 14 deliberate acts of sabotage, each one designed to make it look like I was either incompetent or corrupt. I exported the logs, saved them to the same USB drive and cloud account, and put them away. I did not report them. Not yet. I needed these logs to land at exactly the right moment in front of exactly the right people. Timing was everything. But it was what I found on the third night that changed everything I thought I understood about what was happening to me. I was going through the older emails between Greg and Jocelyn one more time, looking for anything I might have missed when I opened a message from over a year ago. Jocelyn had sent Greg a photograph of herself, holding up a document. She was smiling, and the caption read, "Look what I found in storage from another lifetime." It was a college enrollment certificate, unfinished, dated 6 years prior. And the name printed on it was not Jocelyn Pratt. It was Jocelyn Marsh. I read the name 3 times. Marsh. My hands stopped moving. 7 years ago, I was assigned to an internal audit of a major development project at the firm. During that audit, I discovered that the project's finance director had been systematically embezzling funds $2.3 million siphoned through falsified invoices and phantom subcontractors. I documented every dollar, compiled the evidence, and signed the report that led to her termination and criminal prosecution. The finance director's name was Marsh. I sat at that kitchen table and felt the room tilt. I opened a public court records database and searched the case. It took me less than 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew. Jocelyn was her daughter. She had taken her stepfather's surname after her mother's conviction, rebuilt her identity, and spent the next 5 years engineering a plan to take from me exactly what she believed I had taken. From her family, a career, a husband, a home, a child, a future. She had seduced Greg not because she loved him, but because he was married to me. She had joined my company not for a career opportunity, but to position herself close enough to destroy me from the inside. Every coffee she bought me, every time she called me sis, every smile in the hallway, all of it was calculated. All of it was hatred wearing a mask of warmth. I stared at the name Marsh on that diploma, and 7 years collapsed into a single moment. The woman who bought me coffee every morning, who called me sis, who told me my daughter was adorable, she had spent her entire 20s engineering my destruction. She took my husband. She was dismantling my career. She wanted my child. But she made one mistake. She assumed I was still the naive woman who never saw it coming. She forgot that I'm the same person who caught her mother. And now I was going to catch her too. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for what I can only describe as the most important night of my life. During the day, I played the role of the oblivious wife and the dedicated employee without missing a single beat. I smiled at Greg over dinner. I laughed at Jocelyn's jokes in the break room. I attended meetings with the VP and nodded politely when he expressed concerns about accounting oversight. And every night after the house went dark, I refined my plan down to the minute. By the end of week 4, I had every piece of evidence organized, backed up in 3 separate locations, and ready to deploy. I had researched the filing process at the county courthouse and prepared my divorce petition with the kind of precision I usually reserved for year-end audits. On the Friday morning before the party, I drove to the courthouse, walked through the front doors alone, and filed for divorce, attaching a full accounting of every hidden asset, every fraudulent transfer, every dollar Greg had stolen from our daughter's college fund, along with a formal request to freeze all joint accounts immediately. The clerk stamped the paperwork and handed me my copy. I put it in my bag and drove to work like it was any other day. That afternoon, I stopped by Jocelyn's desk and reminded her about the party. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. You're coming, right?" She smiled that warm, familiar smile and said she would not miss it for the world. I smiled back. For the first time in 5 weeks, I meant it. Saturday evening came with the kind of calm that only exists before a storm. I had invited about 25 people. Greg's mother, my parents, close friends, from both sides. A few colleagues, including my direct supervisor and, of course, Jocelyn. The living room was set up with catered food, soft lighting, and a large screen I had positioned against the main wall For what I told everyone was a slideshow, celebrating our 10 years together. Greg had spent the afternoon helping me arrange chairs and hang decorations, and more than once he squeezed my hand and told me this was going to be a wonderful night. He had no idea how right he was. When the guests arrived, and the room filled with laughter and conversation, Greg stepped to the center of the living room, raised his glass, and delivered a toast that nearly made me admire how skilled a liar he had become. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," he said, his voice steady and warm. 10 years ago, I married the most incredible woman I've ever known. Nicole is the foundation of this family. She is the reason our daughter is the person she is, and I am grateful for her every single day of my life. The room applauded. Greg's mother pressed a tissue to her eyes. Friends raised their glasses, and Greg looked at me with an expression so sincere that if I had not read his draft divorce petition with my own eyes, the one calling me an unfit mother, I might have believed him. I stood up, thanked everyone for coming, and said I had put together a little slideshow to mark the occasion. I picked up the remote and pressed play. The first images were real. Our wedding day. The hospital room the morning Lily was born. A vacation at the Jersey Shore, where Lily buried Greg's feet in sand. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. 10 years of a life that looked from the outside like everything a family should be. People smiled. A few wiped their eyes. And then the slideshow changed. The next image on the screen was a bank statement, not a photograph of us. A financial document showing a transfer of $8,000 from our joint savings to an account neither I nor anyone in that room had ever heard of. The murmurs started immediately. Then came a second statement, $14,000 withdrawn from Lily's college fund. Then, a lease agreement for a downtown apartment signed by two people, Greg Bennett and Jocelyn Pratt, with a security deposit paid from our joint account. Then a screenshot of a text message thread words of affection between my husband and the woman sitting 12 feet away from his mother. And finally, the last slide, the first page of Greg's draft divorce petition, with the highlighted sentence reading, "Respondent fails to maintain a stable and nurturing home environment for the minor child." The room went dead silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. Greg shot to his feet, his face drained of all color. "Nicole, wait, this is you don't understand." He could not finish a sentence. Every eye in the room was on him, and for the first time in his life, Greg Bennett had no script to follow. I expected Jocelyn to crumble. I expected her to grab her purse and run for the door, but I underestimated her, and I will admit that freely. Because Jocelyn did not run. She stood up. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking, but there was something in her eyes that was not fear. It was rage. The same rage she had been carrying for 7 years, and it came out of her like a dam breaking. She turned to face the room, and her voice cut through the silence like broken glass. "Before any of you judge me," she said, "you need to know who that woman really is." She pointed at me. 7 years ago, she signed a report that destroyed my family. My mother was a finance director, a good woman, and Nicole's audit got her fired, prosecuted, and sent to prison. I had to drop out of college. My father walked out because he couldn't handle the shame. I lost everything. Everything. And she went home that night to her husband and her comfortable life and never thought about us again. The room shifted. I could feel it, that dangerous tilt in the air when people start recalculating their sympathies. A few guests looked at me with expressions I had never seen directed at me before doubt. Jocelyn pressed harder. "So before you call me the villain, ask yourselves who destroyed whose family first." Greg straightened up. He looked at Jocelyn like she had just handed him a rope, and for one terrible suspended moment, I felt the room slipping away from me. I let the silence hold. I let every person in that room sit with Jocelyn's words, feel the weight of them. And then I spoke. "Your mother embezzled $2.3 million, I said. My voice was level. I did not raise it. I did not need to. That is not my opinion. It is a court record. A conviction. I was assigned to audit a project, and I found fraud. I filed a report. I did my job. Your mother made her own choices, and those choices had consequences. I am sorry for what happened to your family, but the person responsible for that is not me. I paused and then I stepped forward. Now let me tell you what you chose. You spent 5 years planning this. You changed your last name. You tracked down my husband and built a relationship with him not because you loved him, but because he was married to me. You applied to my company and got hired in a department that gave you access to financial data. You altered 14 of my reports after hours, using a login that only had read permission. You fed false information to senior leadership to make me look incompetent. And you helped my husband create a fake custody file funded with $14,000 stolen from our 8-year-old daughter's college savings. I turned to Greg's mother. She was already standing, her face ash gray. He took Lily's college money, she asked. Greg opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His mother stared at him for 3 long seconds, then turned and walked out of the room without another word. I looked at Greg. You were planning to file for divorce in 3 weeks. You don't need to. I filed this morning. The court has the complete financial record, every hidden account, every transfer, every fabricated journal entry. I've also requested an immediate freeze on all joint assets. Then I turned to Jocelyn. And those 14 unauthorized edits logged under your account, the timestamps, the IP addresses, the access violations, IT and the executive board will receive the full report Monday morning. Jocelyn stared at me, and for the first time, something cracked behind her eyes. 5 years of planning, unraveling in 15 minutes. Greg sank into his chair like a man hearing his sentence. I looked at them both and said, your mother lost to me 7 years ago because I found the truth. Tonight, history repeats itself. Then I took my daughter's hand, walked through the front door, and I did not look back. I drove to my parents' house that night with Lily asleep in the back seat and a suitcase I had packed 3 days earlier hidden in the trunk. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. She did not ask what happened. She just held the door wide and let us in. I put Lily to bed in my old childhood room, sat down at the kitchen table across from my mother, and for the first time in 5 weeks, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. I did not cry. I was past that, but my hands trembled for a long time, and my mother sat with me in silence until they stopped. The next morning, I began the work of disassembly, not of my life, but of the lie my life had been built on. The legal process moved faster than I expected, largely because Greg had very little ground to stand on. My filing included a comprehensive financial exhibit documenting every hidden transfer, every falsified journal entry, and every dollar removed from Lily's college fund. Greg's attorney attempted to contest the asset claims, but when the court reviewed the evidence bank records with timestamps, the apartment lease bearing both Greg's and Jocelyn's signatures, email correspondence with his own divorce lawyer outlining his strategy to conceal funds, the judge did not deliberate long. The ruling gave me primary custody of Lily and possession of the house. Greg was ordered to pay full restitution of the $47, 0 inches, misappropriated marital assets, including the $14,000 taken from our daughter's education fund. His fabricated journal, the one he had spent months constructing to portray me as a negligent mother, was entered into the record. Not as evidence of my failure, but as evidence of his calculated dishonesty. The document he built to destroy me became the document that destroyed his case. On the Monday morning after the party, I submitted the audit trail logs to the company's IT security department and the executive board through the proper internal channels. I attached a written summary explaining the 14 unauthorized data modifications, the timestamps, the access level violations, and the pattern of targeted sabotage against reports I had authored. The company launched a formal investigation that same week. It did not take long. The system logs were unambiguous. Jocelyn's marketing credentials had been used to make right-level changes to financial documents she was only authorized to view all after business hours, all affecting my work specifically. She was terminated within 10 days for a serious violation of data security policy and professional conduct standards. The VP of operations, who had championed Jocelyn's observations about accounting irregularities without performing his own due diligence, received a formal reprimand from the board for failure of oversight. He never looked at me the same way again, but I did not need his apology. I needed the record corrected, and it was. What happened next carried a kind of justice I could not have engineered even if I had tried. After Jocelyn lost her position, she turned to Greg, the man she had spent 2.5 years cultivating, the man she had convinced to leave his wife and build a new life with her. But the man she found was not the one she had invested in. Greg had no house. The court had awarded it to me. He had no savings. The restitution order had wiped him out. His mother refused to speak to him. His friends had largely distanced themselves after the party. He was living in a studio apartment his brother helped him rent, working the same job, but carrying a reputation that followed him through every room he entered. Jocelyn stayed for 3 weeks. Then she left. No goodbye, no explanation. She simply disappeared from his life, the same way she had appeared in mine, quietly, deliberately, and without looking back. I heard through a mutual acquaintance months later that she had moved out of state. 5 years of revenge, 5 years of planning every detail, infiltrating every corner of my existence, and it ended with nothing. She did not get my husband. She did not get my job. She did not get my daughter. She did not get the satisfaction of watching me fall. And Greg, the man who convinced himself he deserved more than the woman who had loved him faithfully for a decade, ended up with less than he started with. Both of them reached for everything I had, and both of them walked away empty-handed. But I want to be honest about something, because this story does not end with a woman standing on a mountain feeling victorious. Winning a legal battle is not the same as healing. The divorce was finalized, the house was mine, Lily was safe, my career was intact, and still there were nights when I lay in that bed alone and stared at the ceiling and wondered if I had been too ruthless. There were mornings when I reached for the other side of the bed out of habit and found it cold and felt something I could not name. Not regret, not longing, something more like phantom pain, the ache of a limb that has been removed, but that your body still expects to find. I did not talk about it. I did not post my story online or call friends to process what had happened. That is not who I am. Instead, I moved forward in the only way I knew how, one task at a time. I enrolled in an advanced CPA certification program, something I had postponed for years, because Greg always said the timing was not right. I started spending my evenings with Lily instead of at my desk. I hired a contractor and renovated the kitchen, tearing out the dark cabinets Greg had chosen and replacing them with open shelving and white tile and a window box where I planted lavender. It was a small thing, that kitchen, but every time I walked into it, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, the sensation of standing inside a space that was entirely mine. One evening, while clearing out the bedroom closet, I found a Valentine's card tucked behind a stack of old sweaters. I opened it and recognized Greg's handwriting from a decade ago. "Forever yours," it said. I held it for a while. I read it twice. Then I walked to the kitchen, dropped it in the trash can, and closed the lid. There was no anger in it. No ceremony. Just a quiet recognition that the man who wrote those words no longer existed and perhaps never had. 6 months after the party, on a Sunday morning in early June, I stood in my kitchen making pancakes. The sunlight came through the new window above the sink, catching the lavender blossoms on the sill and throwing soft light across the counter. Lily came running down the stairs in her pajamas, the way she always does, and wrapped her arms around my waist before climbing onto her stool. She watched me flip a pancake, and then she asked me something that stopped me mid-motion. "Mom, are you happy?" I set the spatula down and knelt beside her so we were eye to eye. "I'm learning to be happy in my own way," I said. "And I think I'm doing pretty well." She smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that starts in the eyes, and went back to watching the pancakes. On the counter, beside the stove, sat 2 things my new CPA certificate framed, and leaning against the backsplash and a crayon drawing Lily had made the week before. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a large yellow sun. She had written me and Mom in wobbly letters at the bottom. I looked at that drawing, and then I looked at the sunlight filling my kitchen, and I understood something I had not been able to put into words until that very moment. This house was the same address, the same walls, the same roof, but everything inside it had changed because the woman living in it had changed. 10 years. I spent 10 years living inside a lie I mistook for love. I nearly lost everything, not because I was weak, but because I trusted. But here is what I know now: being betrayed is not failure. The only failure is knowing the truth and choosing to look away. I opened my eyes. I fought alone, not because no one offered to help, but because I needed to know that I could. If you are standing where I once stood, remember this: you don't need anyone to save you. You just need to look in the mirror and say to the woman looking back, I choose myself. And that is where Nicole's story ends. Or rather, where her new story begins. She walked into that restroom on a Wednesday afternoon as a woman who trusted blindly, and she walked out of her own anniversary party as a woman who would never again mistake silence for peace or loyalty for love. She did not wait for someone to rescue her. She did not beg for sympathy. She sat down at her kitchen table night after night alone, and she built her case the same way she had built her career, with patience, with precision, and with the quiet certainty that the truth once assembled does not need to shout. Greg lost his wife, his daughter, his home, and his savings, not because Nicole wanted revenge, but because Nicole refused to be erased. Jocelyn spent 5 years crafting the perfect plan to destroy a woman she blamed for her mother's choices. And in the end, she lost everything she came for and walked away with nothing. 5 years of hatred and not a single thing to show for it. But here is the part of this story that stays with me long after the drama fades and the justice is served. Jocelyn's mother committed a real crime. She stole millions from people who trusted her, and she faced real consequences for it. Nicole did not cause that. Nicole filed a report. She did her job. And yet, a young woman spent half a decade believing that punishing Nicole would somehow undo what her mother had done, that destroying an innocent woman's life would fill the hole her mother's choices had left behind. It did not. It never could. Because revenge does not heal anything. It only builds new wounds on top of old ones. Jocelyn could have used those 5 years to rebuild. She could have finished her degree, started a career on her own terms, created a life that had nothing to do with the woman she blamed. Instead, she poured every ounce of her intelligence, her energy, and her youth into tearing someone else down. And when it was over, she had nothing, not because Nicole took it from her, but because she had given it all to hatred, and hatred gave her nothing back. That is the lesson Nicole's story carries beyond the betrayal and the courtroom and the anniversary party. The people who hurt us make their own choices. We do not control that, but what we do with our pain, whether we let it consume us or whether we use it to rebuild, that is the one thing that belongs entirely to us. Nicole chose to rebuild, and that made all the difference. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were not who you thought they were? Have you ever had to fight for yourself when no one else would? Or maybe you know someone who needs to hear Nicole's story today, someone who is sitting in silence right now, unsure whether they are strong enough to stand up. Share this video with them. Sometimes one story is all it takes to remind someone that they are not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what part of Nicole's journey hit you the hardest and what you would have done in her place. I read every single comment, and some of the most powerful stories on this channel have come from viewers just like you who were brave enough to share. If this is your first time here, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because every week we bring you real stories from real people, stories of betrayal, resilience, and the kind of strength that only comes from deciding you are worth fighting for. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are always strong enough to choose yourself.